He thought it was just trash floating in the river. But inside the box, 4 golden retriever puppies, tied, bruised, barely breathing. No tags, no mercy. What Carter found next exposed a dark secret beneath Oregon's waters. And it all began with one kayak trip. Where are you watching from? Comment your city and share this if you believe every dog deserves a second chance. Hood River, Oregon. A town etched between mountains and water, where the morning smelled of damp pine and the river breathed with the slow rhythm of snowmelt and wind. It was just past 6 a.m., and the Columbia River still wore its veil of early mist, light gray tendrils weaving over its surface like ghost smoke. But beneath that drifting fog, the water itself was crystal clear, as if the river had been polished overnight. You could see the riverbed in places, smooth stones lying like ancient coins below the gentle current. Tourists hadn't yet filled the kayak launches or the riverside coffee stands, and for now, the town was holding its breath in silence. Carter Langley's blue kayak cut through the glassy water like a whisper. His movements were quiet and fluid, each paddle stroke symmetrical and sure. At 35, Carter had the kind of build earned through years of working with nature, not against it. His frame was lean but solid, sun-toughened, with strong shoulders and sinewy arms from a lifetime of rowing, climbing, lifting gear. He had dark brown hair, long enough to curl at the ends, and kept his beard neatly trimmed. A faint scar curved along the right side of his forehead, a souvenir from a whitewater accident that ended his competition days for good. Now, he coached others how to read the water, how to lean into the current, not fight it. He lived alone in a rented ranger cabin just outside town, no family nearby, no partner, no obligations, just him, the river, and the occasional bottle of bourbon on stormy nights. His only constant companion for years had been Bailey, a golden retriever he rescued in his 20s, who died 2 winters ago. The framed photo still sat on the mantel. He hadn't touched it since. Carter had started the morning paddle the same way he always did, with purpose but no destination. The river told him where to go. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and melting snow. The paddle in his hands felt like an old friend, steady, familiar, and wordless. He passed under the old railway bridge, where the gulls liked to perch, and waved instinctively to a passing fisherman on shore. The fog began to thin, revealing the sheer beauty of the river around him. Mountain shadows on one side, vineyards rolling far behind the hills on the other, and water so clear it seemed unreal. Then he saw it. Off to the right, just beyond a clutch of alder trees leaning over the bank, something floated in the water. Not a log, not debris. It didn't move the way wood drifted. It was heavier, spinning slowly in place, as if it was resisting the pull of the current. Carter adjusted course and narrowed his eyes. As he drew closer, he saw it was a wooden crate, old and water-stained. One of its corners had broken, and the lid looked half loose. The box hovered awkwardly in the eddy, not moving downstream, not quite still. He paused a few feet away, letting the kayak glide quietly. The water beneath him was clear as glass. He could see the crate's shadow on the stones below. Something about the box gave him a chill, like it had no business being here, like it had waited for someone. Then came the sound. A soft, broken whimper. He froze. It had come from the crate. He waited. There it was again, a high-pitched cry, weak, barely louder than the wind skimming across the river. He dipped his paddle into the water and moved another yard closer. His heart had picked up speed now, thudding just beneath his ribs. He leaned forward and peered through the cracked side of the box. Movement, 4 shapes huddled together. Tiny, golden, breathing. Puppies. Golden retriever puppies, maybe 2 months old. Soaked, shivering, pressed against one another inside the crate as if trying to become one creature. One of them raised its head slowly, met Carter's gaze for half a second, then collapsed again. The others were silent, one twitching weakly, one not moving at all. The box tilted slightly as a breeze picked up. The river caught its edge. It started to drift. Panic punched through Carter's calm. He turned the kayak with a hard stroke, pushed toward the crate. The water was deeper here, clean, glassy, deceptively peaceful, but it could sweep away anything in seconds. The crate bumped into a submerged log, then floated free again, turning toward the mid-river current. 6 feet away, the puppies were barely visible now, curled in the shadows. The box wobbled. Carter braced his legs, leaned forward, and reached out over the water. The water had turned against him the moment he reached for the crate. Carter's blue kayak tilted dangerously as he lunged forward, fingers closing around the slick wood. The current tugged at the crate, trying to reclaim it, but Carter gritted his teeth and yanked it onto the back of his kayak. The sudden shift in weight nearly capsized him, but he righted himself with a practiced twist of his hips and began paddling hard toward the shore. Each stroke was a battle against time and the slow-growing panic gnawing at his gut. Once on dry land, he dragged the crate up the gravel bank behind his riverside cabin and pried the lid open with a crowbar from his gear shed. What he saw made his heart crack clean down the middle. 4 golden retriever puppies, so young their legs barely had strength to hold their weight, lay tangled in a sodden blanket. One whimpered. Another tried to lift its head and failed. A third lay frighteningly still. The fourth had a deep red ring around its neck, raw where something had once cut tight. Without thinking, Carter lifted them gently into a thick fleece towel and brought them inside. The warmth of the fireplace did little to stop their shivering. One pup, the one with the injured neck, seemed barely conscious. He wrapped each of them in dry cloths, laid them in front of the fire, and stared at them, breathing hard. He needed help, fast. Carter loaded the puppies into the back of his aging Subaru Outback, padding the floor with more blankets. The nearest vet clinic that opened early was about 20 minutes into town. He drove fast, wipers clicking across the windshield as the mist thickened. The river disappeared behind him, but the image of those wide, frightened eyes stayed burned into his thoughts. The bell above the door of Wasco Animal Medical Center jingled as Carter pushed inside, carrying 2 bundled puppies and holding the door open with his foot for the other 2. The waiting room was small and smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine cleaner. A young woman behind the counter, blonde with a pierced nose and a sweatshirt that read "Adopt, Don't Shop," looked up and froze. "Are they alive?" she asked, already coming around the desk. "Barely," Carter said. "I found them in a box in the river." Without another word, she gestured him down the hall. "Room 3. I'll get Dr. Caldwell." The room was warm, with a metal exam table and cabinets stocked with gauze and IV bags. Carter laid the puppies down one by one. The girl, whose name tag read Jenny, returned moments later with a woman behind her. Dr. Emma Caldwell didn't look like the kind of vet you saw in advertisements. She was tall, maybe 41, with short-cropped black hair streaked with silver at the temples, and lines on her forehead that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. Her expression was firm, her jaw squared like a person who didn't back down easily. Her eyes, though, were sharp and perceptive, the kind that saw more than you wanted them to. She stepped in and immediately began assessing the pups, her gloved hands moving with gentle precision. "Bring me warm fluids," she told Jenny. "Check vitals on this one." Then she turned to Carter. "Where exactly did you find them?" "Floating in a wooden crate about half a mile from the ferry bridge. Tied shut, no tags. They were nearly gone by the time I got to them." Emma didn't flinch, but her mouth tightened. This isn't random. These pups are no older than 8 weeks. They've been starved. One has a broken rear leg, untreated. And this—" she gently turned the neck of the smallest pup, revealing the angry red mark—"was a zip tie." Carter stared, numb. "Who does that?" Emma stood, pulling off her gloves. "People who run illegal breeding operations. Sometimes, when the pups don't come out perfect, they're dumped. Especially Goldens. They're in high demand, which means higher expectations." Carter shook his head slowly. "You've seen this before?" Her eyes flicked to him, tired but resolute. "Too many times. Most of the time, they're already dead." She paused, then softened her voice. "You did good, bringing them in when you did." Jenny returned with fluids, and Emma got to work. Over the next hour, Carter stood in a corner, watching as the two women worked together like clockwork. The puppies received fluids, heat wraps, and small syringes of nutrients. The smallest one, Emma said she'd call her Patient 4 for now, was the most fragile. "She might not make it," Emma warned, "but she's a fighter." Only once did she glance at Carter directly. "What's your name?" "Carter Langley." Recognition flickered behind her eyes. "You're the kayaking coach, right? With the cabin out near the old ranger station?" "That's me." Emma gave a nod. "You're lucky the current didn't pull you under trying to save them." Carter offered a tired, crooked smile. "Didn't feel like luck at the time." Later, while Jenny stepped out to prepare the back kennels, Emma leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Look, this could be part of something bigger. A few weeks ago, we had a litter of French bulldogs dumped outside of Parkdale, same condition. Different breed, but same MO, starved, restrained, no microchips." Carter looked at her. "You think it's organized?" Emma didn't answer immediately. "I think someone's trying to cover their tracks, and I think you found what they didn't want to be found." The room fell quiet. Then the smallest puppy let out a faint, high-pitched yelp. Carter moved closer. She was trying to lift her head. Emma watched. "She's not done yet." The next morning broke clear and colder than the day before. The mist that usually floated like gauze above the Columbia River had burned away early, revealing a crisp sky the color of polished steel and water so clear it reflected the rocky cliffs like a mirror. Carter Langley stood on the edge of the old ferry dock just north of town, a steaming travel mug of black coffee in his hand, and eyes locked on the stretch of water where he'd found the crate. The 4 puppies were now resting under medical care, their conditions stabilized overnight at the clinic. Carter had checked in before sunrise, just long enough to make sure Patient 4, the weakest one, was still breathing. She was, barely. That gave him enough fire to get moving. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. His mind kept circling back to one question. Who would go through the trouble of putting 4 live puppies in a nailed wooden crate and toss them into a river? There were signs the crate hadn't been there long. No mold inside, the wood only recently waterlogged, the blanket damp but not decayed. Whoever had left it knew the currents and where to place it for it to be found, possibly, or they didn't care whether it was found at all. Carter stepped further onto the dock. The old wood groaned beneath his boots. This place had once been the central ferry point before the bridge was built decades ago. Now it was more of a local spot, sometimes used by fishers, sometimes quiet and forgotten. The spot made sense, remote enough to avoid notice, but with just enough access to back a truck in and offload something in the dark. A gull cried overhead, swooping low. Carter turned at the sound of a vehicle approaching behind him. A black pickup truck, older Ford, faded paint, custom steel bumper, rolled up along the gravel pull-off near the dock's edge. The truck idled for a moment, its driver still inside. Carter narrowed his eyes. The man who stepped out looked to be in his early 50s. Medium height, slightly hunched shoulders beneath a dark gray hoodie. Work boots, jeans caked with river mud, a baseball cap pulled low. He had a heavy beard, the kind that didn't come from style but from weeks without care. His skin was ruddy, his hands thick with calluses. A man who worked with his hands. But it wasn't his clothes or the way he walked that bothered Carter. It was the way the man kept looking down at the river with a long, cautious gaze, scanning the shoreline like someone expecting something, or checking to see if something had been disturbed. Carter kept his position at the end of the dock. From this distance, the man hadn't seen him yet. Then the stranger spotted the muddy footprints leading down the gravel bank. His eyes followed the trail for a long second. That's when Carter made his move. He turned casually, pretending to look out at the water, but kept the man in his periphery. The man noticed him and froze. Their eyes met for a fraction too long. The man turned back toward his truck. Carter pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and, pretending to check messages, lifted the camera. He managed to snap a quick shot of the rear license plate as the truck pulled away, tires crunching gravel, then spinning out briefly on the paved road. The vehicle took off toward the highway. Back in his cabin later, Carter loaded the blurry photo onto his laptop, zoomed in, and sharpened the image. The plate was Oregon issued. The number was just legible, 5C29 hours. He hesitated, debating whether to call it in, then decided to run the plate through a public registry first. He had a friend, Ben Holbrook, a local tow yard manager in the Dalles, who owed him a favor from when Carter helped his son with kayaking lessons the year before. Ben answered after 2 rings. "Carter, hey, everything good?" "Sort of. Need a small lookup. You still got that DMV database access?" Ben chuckled. "Still unofficially, yeah. Shoot me the plate." 10 minutes later, Ben called back. "Belongs to a company vehicle, Wildline Outfitters, registered to a business license in Hood River. Owner listed as a Nicholas R. Downer. Ring a bell?" "No," Carter replied, "but thanks." Wildline Outfitters? Carter knew the name. It was a local adventure tour company that ran extreme rafting and backcountry kayaking excursions through some of the region's rougher water routes. They had a decent reputation among tourists, but locals tended to avoid them. Too flashy, too fast, and too many near accidents. He remembered now seeing one of their guides almost flip a tandem kayak while filming a promo near Dog Creek. Carter never liked how they handled the water, like it was a thrill ride instead of a living force. He decided to pay them a visit. The Wildline base camp was located just outside town, near the edge of a ravine that dipped sharply toward the White Salmon River. The property was ringed with aluminum fencing and banners that read, "Wildline, choose your adventure." A series of sheds and trailers sat near the tree line, and behind them, a line of brightly painted kayaks and inflatable rafts were stored on racks. Carter parked his Subaru outside the gate and walked up the gravel drive. The main office trailer had a window open. A young man with a tanned face, mirrored sunglasses, and sun-bleached blonde hair sat inside, flipping through a GoPro mount catalog. He was tall, maybe in his early 20s, with a lean build and the kind of permanent grin that looked like it had never been tested by tragedy. "Need help?" the kid asked, leaning back in his chair. "I'm looking for Nick Downer." The smile faltered just slightly. "He's not here." "Do you know when he will be?" "Maybe tomorrow, depends on the tours." Carter nodded. "You work for him?" "Name's Tyler," the kid replied. "Guide, part-time mechanic, full-time legend." He smirked, but Carter didn't return it. "Do you know if Nick's truck was out by the old ferry dock yesterday?" Tyler hesitated. It was slight, but noticeable. "No idea," he said. Carter gave a half smile. Right. Well, tell him Carter Langley came by and I'll be back. He turned and left, feeling eyes on his back the whole way to the car. The wind picked up just after midnight. It whipped through the trees above Carter's cabin in rhythmic bursts, brushing pine needles across the tin roof and rattling the shutter on the north-facing window. Carter had been dozing in the worn recliner by the fire, half awake after a long day of searching, questioning, and coming up short. His mind had been stuck in a loop, replaying the stranger at the dock, the Wildline employees' awkward deflections, the tiny, broken bodies of the pups wrapped in blankets at the clinic. The following morning, the fog had returned to the Columbia River like a memory, curling low around the trees and resting just above the water, heavy and unmoving. Carter Langley stood on his porch sipping lukewarm coffee, his eyes flicking between the river and the blinking light on his phone. The motion-activated camera had picked up nothing else during the night, aside from a deer, a raccoon, and some wind-blown branches. But the shadow he'd seen before, tall, deliberate, still haunted the back of his mind. Whoever had come, they hadn't given up. By mid-morning, Carter was back at the veterinary clinic. The puppies were slowly improving, and patient 4, still unnamed, had lifted her head for the first time during the night. Jenny, the assistant, looked less tired, more hopeful. Carter stayed for an hour, helping clean their crate, replacing soiled towels with fresh ones from a bin stacked in the corner. Emma Caldwell arrived not long after. She looked the same as always, clean navy scrubs, short-cropped dark hair swept back from her temples, her jaw set with the quiet pressure of responsibility. She nodded at Carter, then motioned him to her office in the back, a room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Emma didn't sit behind her desk. Instead, she stood by the window, arms folded, looking out at the small grove of trees behind the clinic. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I didn't sleep much last night." "Me neither," Carter replied, "but not because of puppies." Emma turned, her face unreadable. "I think we're dealing with something a lot uglier than a backyard breeder." Carter leaned against the doorframe. "Go on." She walked slowly to her desk and opened the top drawer, pulling out a folder and handing it to him. Inside were photos, some grainy, some sharp, of different litters of dogs, mostly golden retrievers, labs, and French bulldogs. Many were emaciated. Others bore signs of abuse, rope burns, shaved patches from botched injections, one with its ear crudely clipped. There were records, too. Confiscated microchip codes, confiscation dates, and small red stamps that read "confirmed fraud." Emma spoke while Carter skimmed. "In the last 9 months, I've treated at least 5 separate cases like the one you brought in. All young dogs, all either dumped near water or left outside town in weather they couldn't survive. None chipped. Or worse, chipped with fake numbers, the kind you order online. Why haven't the police stepped in? They don't have a full picture. Every case looks like an isolated incident. 1 here, 2 there. But if you line them up, it's a pattern." Emma nodded. "And the more I think about it, the more I believe it's tied to Wildline." Carter raised his eyebrows. "The tour company. They run multi-day river tours, right? All through the Columbia, up into Washington, sometimes even down into northern Nevada. I checked their routes. Some of them run suspiciously close to places that have been flagged in Idaho and Nevada for illegal breeding operations." Carter frowned. "You think they're transporting the dogs?" "I think it's possible they're moving pups during off hours, maybe as part of their gear shipments. They have big rafts, storage boxes, remote stops. No one checks river gear as tightly as freight trucks." Carter closed the folder. "That explains why someone would dump a crate near the water. Maybe the delivery didn't go as planned. Emma hesitated. Or maybe they were culling the ones they couldn't sell. Silence filled the room. Outside the window, a crow cawed once and flew off into the fog. "They're not just dumping dogs, Carter," Emma said finally. "They're treating them like broken merchandise." Carter clenched his fists slowly. "Then we expose them." Emma looked surprised. "How?" "We use what we've got. Cameras, tracks, your records. We start asking questions in the right places. You said some of those abandoned dogs were found in Parkdale, right? I'll drive out there, ask around. Maybe someone saw something." Emma gave a slow nod. "I can contact a friend at the Oregon Humane Network. She used to work undercover on hoarding cases. Maybe she can offer insight." Before Carter left, he spent another hour with the puppies. The biggest one, Bruno, was now able to walk a few steps, limping but determined. The second pup, a smaller female with honey-colored fur and a small scar on her front paw, licked his hand while wagging her tail faintly. He hadn't named her yet, but something about her calm gaze felt grounding. As for patient 4, she was still quiet, but her eyes followed Carter now, not fearfully but curiously. Back at his cabin, Carter reviewed the trail cam footage again. He marked the timestamp of the shadowy figure and copied it to a separate file. Then he packed a small day pack with a flask of coffee, a notepad, and the folder Emma had given him. Parkdale was about an hour south, tucked into the foothills of Mount Hood. He knew the area, a few farms, an old gas station, and a dog rescue run by a reclusive woman named Grace Monroe. Grace was in her mid-60s, tall and wiry, with long gray hair often tied back in a red bandana. She wore flannel shirts no matter the weather and had deep crow's feet around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. People in town called her eccentric, but those who knew better called her relentless. She'd once chained herself to a courthouse door over a zoning law that threatened her shelter. When Carter knocked at the front of the rescue, a squat, cedar-shingled house with kennels built out back, Grace answered the door with a glare. "I'm not selling puppies," she said before he could speak. "I'm not buying any," Carter replied. "I just want to talk." That softened her. Slightly. Over coffee in her cramped kitchen, surrounded by sleepy dogs curled in corners and the low hum of a radio playing bluegrass, Carter laid out everything. The crate in the river, Wildline's possible connection, Emma's suspicions, and the pattern of dumped litters. Grace listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "I've seen this before," she said. 5, 6 years ago. They used to run them through rail freight. Now they're smarter, stick to rivers, back roads, less regulated. You think Wildline's involved? I think someone's using them. Either they know it and don't care, or they're being paid to look the other way. Grace stood and opened an old filing cabinet in the corner, pulling out a faded map. She pointed to 3 red X's along the river. "That's where I found crates like yours, all within 5 miles of their tour routes." Carter studied the map. "That's enough to get attention." "Not from the sheriff," Grace muttered. "They think I'm nuts." Carter folded the map and tucked it into his pack. "I don't." The Columbia River had a different face at night. Quiet, cold, and layered in secrecy. The stars above Hood River flickered like old lanterns, and the moon cast a fractured silver path across the water's surface. Carter Langley paddled low and slow in his kayak, his blue vessel nearly soundless as it cut through the current like a knife through silk. He wore a black waterproof jacket and a dark beanie pulled low. No lights, no noise, just the rush of water and the rhythm of his breath. It had taken him days to narrow the schedule. Wildline outfitters ran occasional extreme night paddle tours for thrill-seeking tourists, multi-hour guided runs that launched under moonlight and wound through lesser-used channels of the river. Most people didn't know the company had converted larger tandem kayaks to carry more than gear. Carter suspected they were doing more than just hiding snacks for tourists. Earlier that afternoon, he had watched one of Wildline's transport vans load several long wooden crates onto a trailer near their off-site dock. The crates didn't match any known tour equipment. The corners were reinforced and the lids screwed shut. One had a corner split and what looked like straw peeking through the seam. Now, hours later, Carter kept his distance as the Wildline group moved ahead. There were 2 guides and about 5 tourists, each in brightly colored kayaks, their headlamps occasionally flashing across the trees as they paddled with excitement and ignorance. Carter remained behind, sticking to the shadows, gliding through side channels like a ghost. The tandem kayak he was watching closely belonged to one of the guides, a large man with broad shoulders and a shaved head, dressed in a company-issued black wetsuit and life jacket. The front compartment of his kayak had a bulky canvas cover strapped tight, too bulky for food or sleeping gear. Carter circled behind a cove and waited. When the group took a short break near a shallow bank to adjust gear and let one tourist relieve himself, Carter seized the moment. He pulled in closer, barely stirring the water. From a low bank behind a screen of reeds, he coasted silently up to the back of the guide's kayak and placed a gloved hand on the covered compartment. The canvas had moisture but wasn't cold like ice chests or water containers. It was warmer, like there was body heat trapped inside. He lifted one corner. The stench hit him first, urine, straw, and fear, then a sound, a muffled whimper. The shape inside stirred. Puppies. His chest tightened. He leaned in further for a better look, using the soft red filter of his flashlight. At least 2, maybe 3, tiny golden pups crammed together in a crate barely bigger than a toolbox. One had its mouth taped, another had fur matted with feces. Carter's hand clenched into a fist. Behind him, a twig snapped. "Hey!" a voice barked. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Carter spun around, just in time to see the guide with the shaved head charging toward the water's edge. Another man, a second guide, younger, with long blonde hair and sharp eyes, emerged from the trees, holding a flashlight and something heavy in his hand. Maybe a radio. Maybe not. Carter didn't wait to find out. He pushed off the shore with a strong stroke of the paddle and launched into the current. Shouts erupted behind him. The river, once still and gentle, turned alive with motion. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The voices followed him, one angry, one winded, and the slap of paddles chasing him echoed off the canyon walls. Carter pushed harder, using every ounce of his training, taking narrow bends and hugging tree lines, letting the moonlight guide him rather than the headlamp he dared not use. He had mapped these waters in daylight. Now he trusted memory and instinct. But they were catching up. Behind him, the younger guide was faster, his kayak slicing through the water with purpose. The man was probably ex-military or at least a lifelong athlete. His strokes were aggressive, sharp. The other one lagged, barking orders into a handheld radio. Then came a sound Carter didn't expect, a bark, high-pitched, urgent, from the riverbank near his cabin. It was Hunter, the golden retriever mix who'd been sleeping in the kennel next to the shed where the rescued pups were kept. Carter had noticed him a few days ago, about 5 months old, leggy with oversized paws and alert, intelligent eyes. A neighbor's stray that had taken a liking to Carter's place and refused to leave. Emma had said he was likely dumped in the woods weeks ago, half wild but desperate for companionship. Tonight, Hunter had escaped his kennel and now stood at the edge of the riverbank, barking toward the water. Carter caught the movement with the corner of his eye. Hunter began running, parallel to Carter's kayak, keeping pace along the bank, barking louder with each second. The dog's paws kicked up dirt and pine needles as he bounded over rocks and roots, leaping with such determination it almost looked rehearsed. The distraction worked. The younger guide turned to glance at the dog, startled by the barking, and miscalculated the current. His kayak caught a submerged log. The craft jolted, twisted, and capsized with a splash. Carter didn't stop. By the time the older guide rounded the bend, Carter had vanished into the tree-lined curve of the river, swallowed by darkness. Back at the cabin, nearly an hour later, soaked and breathing hard, Carter checked on the puppies in the shed. They were sleeping, undisturbed. But Hunter was there, pacing along the doorframe, tail wagging like he had saved the world. Carter knelt beside him and ran a hand down his back. The pup leaned into the touch, whining softly. "You're not just staying," Carter murmured. "You're part of this now." The rain returned that evening, soft at first, then steady, soaking the rooftops of Hood River and bleeding down the narrow gutters that laced the old boatyard where wildline outfitters stored their gear. Carter stood beneath the awning of a boarded-up tackle shop across the street, jacket soaked through at the shoulders, watching the front gate through a pair of field binoculars. He wasn't looking for evidence tonight. He was looking for a man. Roy Mercer had worked the night shift at the marina for more than 2 decades. 65 years old, semi-retired, with a gait slowed by arthritis but eyes as sharp as river hawks. Roy was the kind of man the town barely noticed anymore. He shuffled through diners like a ghost, spoke little unless spoken to, and never changed his worn-out denim jacket no matter the season. His beard was short but unkempt, streaked with white, and his hands were always stained with oil or coffee. Carter had found him by accident, overheard his name from a waitress at McKinnon's Cafe while asking about late-night activity near the docks. Roy arrived just after 7, rain dripping from the bill of his faded mariner's cap. He limped slightly as he unlocked the small office beside the gates, flicked on the floodlights with a grunt, and disappeared inside. Carter waited 5 minutes before crossing the street. The inside of the marina's office smelled like paper, diesel, and old rain. Roy sat behind a battered metal desk with a mug of gas station coffee in his hand and a book of crossword puzzles in his lap. He didn't look up as Carter entered. "You're not here to ask about boat rentals," Roy muttered. "No," Carter replied. "I'm here about the crates." Roy's hand froze mid-sip. Slowly, he set down the mug. "You one of those animal folks?" "Not exactly, but I pulled 4 dying puppies out of the river last week. 2 nights ago, I saw more, hidden in the front compartment of a wildline guide's kayak. I need to know what happens at night on this dock." Roy exhaled sharply, leaned back in his chair and scratched his beard. "Figured it was something like that. I've been working these slips a long time. Seen weird things, but lately, it's different." "Different how?" Roy rubbed his temple. "They've got this walk-in freezer unit in the back. Not one of those standard coolers. This one's mobile, like a damn freight container. Some nights, I hear things coming from it." "What kind of things?" He paused. "Scratching, crying, real soft. Once or twice barking, but muffled like something trying to get out." Carter's stomach turned. "You ever look inside?" "Tried, locked. Keypad entry. Someone came around a day later asking why I was poking around. Big guy. Wore that same wildline uniform but didn't give a name. Just smiled too wide. The kind of smile that says, 'Don't ask again.'" "Why didn't you report it?" Roy looked away. Report it to who? Sheriff won't care unless I got a photo of a crime being committed. All I got is noise and gut feeling. Carter nodded slowly. Would you be willing to testify? Even just tell what you've told me now, on record? Roy looked at him, weary but not afraid. I would have said no a week ago, but if they're dumping pups in rivers now, yeah, I'll help. They exchanged numbers. Carter promised to loop in Emma and Grace and coordinate with the Oregon Humane Network for a legal angle. As he stepped back into the rain, Roy called out behind him, Hey, if I end up face down in the river, tell him I didn't fall. Carter smiled thinly. I'll make sure of it. The next morning, Roy's courage was tested. A plain white envelope had been slipped beneath the marina office door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed, no signature. People who mind their business stay alive longer. You're old enough to know that. Roy brought the letter to Carter's cabin personally. He arrived just before noon, his truck covered in river dust and dog fur. When Carter opened the door, he found Roy holding the envelope in one hand and a six-pack of root beer in the other. Figured I'd bring a peace offering while I scared the hell out of both of us, Roy said dryly. Carter read the note in silence, then placed it on the counter, hands resting heavily beside it. They know you talked to me. Hell, Roy snorted. They probably knew before I did. Did you tell anyone else? No, but this town leaks faster than a busted raft. Carter called Emma, who drove to the cabin within the hour, boots muddy from the shelter and a cold fury simmering just below the surface. She read the note, then turned to Roy. You sure you're still in? I fought in Desert Storm, Doc, Roy said with a shrug. I've stared down tanks. I can handle rednecks with boats. Emma turned to Carter. We need to escalate. If they're threatening witnesses, this is no longer about animal cruelty. It's criminal intimidation. Carter nodded. We go to your contact at Oregon Humane today. They planned a meeting at the clinic that evening. Roy would bring what he knew. Carter would share footage and maps. Grace would call in from Parkdale. And Emma had something else. A file she hadn't opened since she'd started noticing the pattern. Inside were patient notes, incident logs, unreported complaints. Enough to draw a line from the shadows into the light. That night, as Carter locked the door of his cabin and glanced out the window toward the shed, Hunter lay curled by the steps, alert but calm. The rescued pups were inside, healing slowly. One had started wagging his tail when Carter entered. Another was learning to walk again. They were recovering. But outside, things were shifting. The people behind the cruelty were watching now, and they were not done. The fog returned like a bruise to the valley, low, slow, and thick as old smoke. Carter Langley stood at the edge of a narrow tributary that snaked away from the Columbia like a secret, less traveled and quiet. It was late afternoon, though the cloud cover dimmed the sun so much it felt like evening had arrived early. Pines leaned close overhead, their damp limbs brushing together with a sound like hushed voices. The smell came before the sight, something wrong in the air. Not just rot, but chemical, sharp, bitter, almost metallic. Carter spotted the box a few feet from the riverbank, half hidden beneath a tangle of branches. Like the one he'd found days ago, it was wooden, handmade, hastily nailed shut. This one had started to decay around the edges. The lid had warped with water, and a thin trail of ants moved along the seam like mourners. He crouched, hand over nose, and carefully pried it open. Inside lay a golden retriever puppy, maybe 2.5 months old. Its eyes were still half open, glazed in death. Its fur was patchy along the flanks, stiff with dried fluids. Carter's stomach tightened when he noticed the tiny shaved patch on the hind leg, a crude injection site. There was a syringe buried in the corner of the crate, uncapped, the needle bent. He pulled out his phone and called Emma. "Where are you?" she asked instantly. "South Inlet, near the split-off by Mill Branch Trail. I found another box. There's a dead pup inside. Alive recently. Not for long, but there's a needle. I'm bringing the body in." "Be careful," she said, and hung up. He wrapped the pup gently in a clean tarp he kept for emergencies, placed it into the back of his Subaru, and drove straight to the clinic. The rain returned as he drove, first a whisper, then steady, then loud against the windshield like drumming fingers. When Carter arrived, Emma was already prepped, gloves on, mask in place. Her face looked even sterner than usual. They took the puppy to the back room where necropsies were performed. Emma worked quickly, professionally. She found the injection mark immediately and drew samples from the tissue around the site. The autopsy was quiet, clinical, but Carter saw it in her eyes, the grief beneath the precision. Later that evening, after the tests were run, Emma sat down beside Carter in the break room, still in her scrubs, her hair damp from a late rinse. She set a small vial on the table. The liquid inside was yellow-tinted, viscous. "It's called HGM-91, she said. "It's not legal here. Technically, it's not legal anywhere in North America." Carter stared at the vial. "What does it do?" "It's a synthetic hormone compound, originally developed in Eastern Europe to stimulate rapid growth in livestock. But it has a side effect. It produces thick fur, broad muscle structure, and artificially intensifies pigmentation. Breeders overseas started using it to make pups look more purebred. Larger heads, shinier coats, designer genetics, basically." Carter's jaw tightened. "So, people are killing dogs just to make others look fancier?" Emma nodded grimly. "Or worse, injecting them too early, ruining their immune systems. This one," she gestured toward the cold room, "was probably used as a test. It died too early to be sold, so they disposed of it. They dumped it like trash. They always do." As Emma spoke, Jenny entered quietly, holding her tablet. "Sorry to interrupt. One of the tags just popped a hit." Carter looked up. "Which tag?" "The chipped collar from pup number 3, the one you named Lexi." Emma took the tablet, her fingers moving swiftly. "It's a ghost ID. The chip ID links back to a registry, but the address is fake. However, the supplier, Global Pet Logistics, has been flagged before in a cross-state sting operation. Idaho." Carter leaned in. "That matches the route. Grace said dogs were being moved from Idaho through here, hidden on Wildline's boats." Emma added, "And this confirms they're using ghost chips and banned hormones. That's not just cruelty, it's trafficking." Carter's mind flashed back to the young guide from Wildline. The quick glances, the lies, the too casual demeanor. They weren't just ferrying dogs. They were hiding something so much bigger. That night, Carter returned to his cabin but didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, lights off, Hunter curled at his feet. He could still see the pup in the box, its still body, its glassy eyes. He couldn't forget the syringe. He thought of Grace in Parkdale, and Roy with his trembling hands. He thought of Lexi, now asleep in the shed, healing slowly. She would have died in a crate just like that one if he'd come a minute later. Carter rose and stepped outside. The wind had picked up again. Cold, sharp, wild. He looked at the sky and whispered, "No more crates." The morning was brittle with cold. Mist still clung to the trees around Hood River like the final breath of winter refusing to let go. Carter stood beside Emma Caldwell outside the Wasco County Sheriff's Department. a folder thick with documentation pressed under his arm. His knuckles were white. He hadn't slept in over 24 hours. Beside him, Emma looked the same as always, pressed, composed, but her eyes burned with something more than resolve. She held the same folder Carter did, only hers had autopsy results, hormone analysis, and chip irregularities. Together, they had assembled a case born from drowned puppies and blood-spattered straw. The woman who greeted them at the front desk was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore her badge like armor. Her nameplate read Lieutenant Donna Reeves. Reeves was in her early 50s, with dark auburn hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes like storm-washed slate. She carried herself like a soldier, but there was something gentler in the way she greeted Emma, a flicker of something personal. "You're the vet who filed the ghost chip report?" she asked, motioning them into a private interview room. Emma nodded. "This is Carter Langley, the man who rescued the pups. We think we have enough to act." Reeves listened without interruption as they laid it all out. The dumped crates, the hormone injections, the falsified microchip IDs, the trail cameras, the eyewitnesses, and the dead puppy in the second box. When Emma handed over the syringe analysis, Reeves finally blinked. "HGM 91, she said, repeating the label aloud. "That was flagged by the DEA 3 years ago. It's supposed to be blacklisted for veterinary use." "They're using it to pump up pups for designer resale," Carter said. "They sell the illusion of purebred perfection, no matter the cost." Reeves exhaled through her nose. "I had a lab once. Got her from a breeder who swore she was AKC certified. Turned out she had congenital hip dysplasia and kidney failure. She died before she turned 2. Vet said it was likely hormone-related. I filed a complaint, but it went nowhere." She straightened and turned to a nearby cabinet, pulling out a tablet and typing swiftly. "Do you have a name?" "Wildline Outfitters," Emma replied. "And a few of their staff. We've got footage, plate numbers, witnesses." Reeves looked at them, cold steel returning to her eyes. "Then let's take this to the river." Within 3 hours, a task force was mobilized, quietly. Sheriff's deputies and animal control officers gathered in plain vehicles. No sirens. No uniforms visible until they'd crossed into jurisdiction of the marina, where Wildline storage warehouses lined the docks. The operation was led by Reeves herself. She wore a Kevlar vest under her windbreaker, walked with a suppressed sense of urgency, and communicated via hand signals. Carter and Emma stayed behind the main perimeter, stationed inside a van with Grace Monroe, who'd arrived from Parkdale that morning, map in hand and fury in her voice. "They've got a walk-in freezer unit at the rear of Building B," Grace said. "That's where Roy heard the sounds. If they're prepping to move dogs, that's the place." The signal was given. Officers moved in. The moment was quiet at first, just boots over gravel and the low hum of the river nearby. Then shouting erupted. 2 men tried to run, one toward the river, the other into the tree line. Both were tackled within seconds. One of them Carter recognized instantly. Tyler, the smirking Wildline guide with the sun-bleached hair. Gone was the charm. His mouth curled in panic, his hands shaking as officers zip-tied his wrists. Inside the warehouse, the reality was worse than any of them had expected. Rows of crates, at least 20, lined the walls. Some held puppies, shivering, eyes wide with confusion and pain. Others were stacked with bags of powdered supplement marked in a foreign language, likely illegal enhancers. In the rear freezer unit, officers found 2 sedated adult dogs, alive but weak, and a small duffel of unlabeled syringes and vials packed in dry ice. Emma moved from crate to crate, checking pulses, whispering softly to those still able to move. Carter helped carry the injured to the waiting rescue vehicles. One dog, a golden with cloudy eyes, licked his wrist as he lifted her out. The trust nearly broke him. In a separate room, they found paperwork, ledgers, schedules, false registry numbers, a map marked with drop points across Oregon, Washington, and northern Nevada. And in the back office, a man sat in a rolling chair, arms crossed, defiant. Nicholas Downer, owner of Wildline. Late 40s, built like an aging athlete, jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. He wore a sleek black shell jacket, his logo embroidered in gold over the left chest. His hands were stained with grease and dried blood. When Reeves entered, he didn't stand. "This is a mistake," he said. "You've got no right." She cut him off. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of animal cruelty, possession of controlled substances, fraud, and trafficking. We have more than a right. We have a duty." The look he gave her wasn't anger. It was fear masked as arrogance. Outside, under the gray sky, Carter stood beside Hunter, who had been waiting at the edge of the operation since the beginning. The dog's ears perked at every sound, his body ready, as if he knew this moment mattered. Roy arrived in time to see the suspects led out in cuffs. "Good to see them in bracelets for once," he muttered. Carter didn't answer. He knelt beside Hunter, buried a hand in the dog's thick fur. "It's not over," he whispered, "but it's started." The morning sun spilled gold across the surface of the Columbia River, casting long, shimmering bands across the water like ribbons of light. Mist clung lazily to the treetops, but the air held warmth now. Spring had settled into Hood River, not with the haste of a storm, but with the quiet confidence of healing. Beneath that soft sky stood a modest wooden structure tucked into a clearing not far from where the tributary split and rejoined the main river. River Home Sanctuary, carved into a driftwood sign at the entrance. The building had once been an old ranger outpost. Carter Langley had restored it plank by plank with his own hands, replacing rotted wood with reclaimed pine, repainting it in warm, earthy tones, and opening the porch to the river with wide steps for paws and feet alike. What was once a site of personal solitude was now a space for second chances, for the wounded, the abandoned, and those who, like him, had nearly drowned under the weight of silence. It had been 1 year since the raid on Wildline Outfitters. 1 year since cries from crates were silenced for good. The sanctuary was now home to 23 rescued dogs, including the 4 puppies Carter had pulled from the river. Bruno, the bold-hearted; Lexi, gentle and watchful; Nash, always first to greet; and Sable, the smallest who once clung to life with nothing but breath and will. Now, a year old, their coats had grown thick and golden, their bodies strong, their spirits unshaken. They weren't just survivors. They were healers. Every week, children from local shelters, therapy centers, and foster homes arrived by van to take part in the companion program, a project Emma had designed and Carter had built by heart. It paired children suffering from trauma, anxiety, or developmental delays with dogs trained for emotional interaction. The results had been quietly miraculous. Children who hadn't spoken in months whispered to Lexi, and one boy with night terrors now slept soundly with Sable curled by his bed. Emma Caldwell, once the stern vet who had trusted few and expected even less, now served as co-director of the sanctuary. Her office overlooked the back paddock, where dogs ran through tires and under hurdles with abandon. She still wore her navy scrubs most days, but sometimes Carter caught her in jeans and flannel, sleeves rolled up, laughing as she bathed Bruno or cleaned kennels with a teenage volunteer named Maya. Maya had come from the foster system. 17, sharp-tongued, wiry, with long black hair and a tendency to challenge authority. She had first arrived through a school field trip 6 months prior, arms crossed and expression closed. Now she worked part-time at the sanctuary and had begun saving to study veterinary sciences. Emma mentored her quietly, firmly, with the same kind of patience she had once offered frightened dogs in her clinic. Roy Mercer, now 66, had taken on the role of head trainer and grounds manager. The arthritis still made him limp, but his voice had grown stronger. He lived in a converted shed beside the training yard and spent most mornings with a whistle around his neck, a mug of black coffee in one hand, and Hunter, Carter's first companion, padding loyally beside him. Hunter had grown into a magnificent young dog, alert, loyal, and wiser than his years. He led most of the pack runs and often curled beside new arrivals until they calmed. No dog at River Home slept alone, not if Hunter could help it. And then there was Carter. He hadn't touched a kayak in months after the raid, not because he feared the water, but because he no longer needed it as a refuge. His river had become a place of return, not escape. Still, the urge remained, so he found a compromise. Every Sunday morning, Carter paddled out in his old blue kayak from the edge of the sanctuary's dock. But he wasn't alone anymore. Perched on the bank, watching him push off, were 4 familiar figures: Bruno, Lexi, Nash, and Sable, each with heads tilted and ears perked, as if waiting for him to return from battle like the old days. Sometimes Hunter joined them, tail thumping, and when Carter glided back, wet and grinning, they ran to meet him like the tide to shore. River Home wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a promise that suffering could end, that cruelty could be met with resistance, that silence, when broken by truth, could echo into change. News of the operation had rippled across the state. Wildline was dismantled. Nicholas Downer and his co-conspirators were sentenced to federal prison on multiple counts of animal cruelty, trafficking, and felony fraud. Their boats were seized, their licenses revoked. The docks they used were shut down permanently. But the real justice, Carter believed, lived here. In every bark that greeted the sun. In every child's hand that reached for fur instead of fear. As he walked back toward the main yard, he passed the memorial stone under the dogwood tree, the one planted in memory of the unnamed pup in the second crate, the one they couldn't save. Carved into its face were 5 simple words: "No more crates, only freedom." Carter paused, brushed fallen petals from its surface, and whispered thanks. Not just for the lives they had rescued, but for the life he'd been given back. The wind from the river rustled the trees. Somewhere, a dog barked joyfully. It was not the end, just the beginning of the life between 2 shores.